Let's go ahead and get started. I'll pray for us. Father, I pray you help us today. I pray you help us ask good questions. I pray you help me as a teacher, as a museum guide, as we look at the beauty of these pictures. I pray you open our minds to the scriptures. Pray that we would love you more, love other people more, believe more of your promises. Pray that we would understand more of your revelation. We pray all this in Christ's name. Amen. All right. A couple of things I wanted us to look at. It might help us before we do our reading today. So we want to take attendance quiz 16, amazing. I think we only have 28 total, so we're at 16, hard to believe. Here's some things we want to look at and kind of think through. So one is some help with the geography. And the big picture geography is going to be here in Ur of the Chaldees. That's where Abraham was when God called him. And Ur of the Chaldees means the enlightened city. And I think when we read the whole meta-narrative, that it's the city that's claiming to be the enlightened city, but was the exact opposite. God called Abraham, at least as I'm reading the text, and I think the way Stephen and Nehemiah are reading the text, God called him in Ur of the Chaldees, I think when he was 70 years old. Over the course of the next few years, they migrate, Terah and Abram, Sarah, Lot, all migrate. That distance is about 600 miles. Now, if you want to put that in perspective, it's about 600 miles from here to New Orleans. So if you imagine walking from here to New Orleans, how long that would take, how difficult that would be. God called him in Ur and wants him to go all the way to Shechem. That's over 1,000 miles. I looked it up at home today. If we started walking and walked all the way to Kansas City, Missouri, which is on the other side, that's 1,000 miles. So that's that distance. Now, what we do with that, I'm not sure. It looks to me like God told Abraham to leave his family and to go to Canaan. And it looks to me like Abraham half obeyed. He isn't actually the one who leaves, it's Terah. And Terah's the one who takes Abraham, called Abram then, and Sarah and Lot. Terah ends up dying in Haran. And after Terah dies, Abraham at 75 makes the second half of the journey to the Promised Land. Now let's just think about something together. How does that fit in with the meta-narrative of Scripture, would you say?
Well, Abraham doesn't obey.
Abraham doesn't obey, and every single person in the story doesn't obey. So it seems like, but yet, have you picked up in this story, it says over and over, he did just as the Lord commanded him to do. We saw that in the Noah story. And Noah does obey and builds the ark, but he's not the new Adam. He doesn't get people back to the Garden of Eden. So for me as a reader, there's tension there. Like, how does he fully obey when it looks to me like he's partially obeying? So I don't know what to do that. And then you probably had a follow-up on that, Mackenzie.
Yeah, he doesn't obey, but he's still brought, at least in part, to the promised land through God's provision.
Yeah, that God, even though it's perhaps only partial obedience, God is still faithful. I've tried to research a little bit about Ur and Haran. At least some resources I found said they're both fertility cult places. At least some scholars think that many of the names in Abram's family are fertility cult names. That's certainly true of Milcah and Laban, perhaps true of Nahor, perhaps true of Terah. And so if God's calling them out of this so-called enlightened city and they're only half obeying, it's weird they only go halfway. I'm not sure what to do with that unless it's some kind of meta-narrative foreshadowing of the people of God. But God is somehow counting that obedience as perfect obedience. Just as he says of Noah, Noah's a righteous man, perfect in his generation. And then we have a series of wanderings that mimic later things in the history of Israel. So they're Stephen and the book of Nehemiah presuppose that the call was before they ever went, and the call was leave your family, and yet Terah and Lot go with him. So I'm not sure what to make of that. Some of the rabbis think that Terah converted. It is odd that it says Terah brought Abraham, so if God appeared to Abraham, it was actually his father who took him. I'm not sure what to do with that. But they end up in this area, and I think the green part is going to be where Laban and Rebekah are from when when Abraham gets a wife for Isaac, it's from that area there, I think, at the end of the green section. They do go from Haran after Terah dies all the way to Shechem, and that's maybe 500 or 600 miles again here to New Orleans. And he pitches his tent between Bethel and Ai, between the house of God and destruction. I think that's some kind of meta-narrative thing. We're all living, are we not, so between Bethel and Ai, the house of God and destruction. Abraham oddly foreshadows the later things that happen to Israel. So famine drives him down to Egypt. Famine drives Jacob's family. They sell Joseph, and then eventually the whole family goes. Jesus is pursued by a wicked king, and his family goes to Egypt. And then they come back from Egypt, and they go back to this Bethel Ai, and they end up in Hebron. Hebron is the place where Sarah is buried. Abraham's ultimately buried there. Jacob and Leah are buried there. Isaac and Rebekah are buried there. Rachel is buried right outside of Bethlehem. This is what we're about to read today. Abraham's living in Mamre. Mamre and Hebron are virtually the same place. When Lot, who's living in Sodom, is taken captive, Abraham takes 318 men and attacks 4 kingdoms. It's like Abraham's the real deal, you know, like that is so courageous. And you think, why did he do that? It must be he had faith in God, that God was going to help him. And he does the exact same thing that Saul will later do in a story. The people of Jabesh Gilead are being besieged, and the king who's besieging them is King Nahash. Now, what's true of every single name in the Bible?
It means something.
An intelligent reader, what should we ask?
What does it mean?
His name means the serpent. So it's the same like Garden of Eden serpent. So this king named Nahash comes and besieges the city. He says, surrender or I'll destroy you. And they say, well, okay. And he says, and when you surrender, I'm going to cut off your right hand and pluck out your right eye. It's like, wow, that's wicked. And so the people say, well, can we at least send for some help? And if nobody comes to help us, we'll surrender. And so the wicked King Nahash says, okay, send for help. So they send for help. And a guy makes it to Saul. And Saul hears what's going on. And he's going to do the exact same thing that Abraham did. Like he takes his army. And just like Abraham, who splits his army at night and attacks in 2 directions, Saul splits his army and attacks in 3 directions. And so you can just hear the taunt of King Nahash, keep an eye out for your deliverer, you know, just like you can imagine and then all of a sudden, when morning breaks, there's Saul with his army. And so Nahash flees, and there's the other part of Saul's army. And so he turns to flee in another direction, and there's another part of Saul's army. And like the wrath of God comes down with Saul, and he just wipes out wicked King Nahash. And the people of Jabesh Gilead are so devoted to Saul that when Saul and Jonathan die and their bodies are being publicly ridiculed, the people of Jabesh Gilead rise up and rescue their bodies and bury them. And so it's weird that Abraham does that exact same thing when he's rescuing Lot. So like, what's going on? Are these stories somehow recapitulating? Is this foreshadowing what's going on? But you can see how far he goes, and he attacks at this place just outside the promised land in Hobah. And he attacks, and the kings are just like getting drunk and just the plunder and all that goes. And here comes Abraham with his 318. And it kind of mimics Gideon with the 300, and they fall on these kings and they just go to town, and the wicked kings flee for their lives. And so they get all the people who had gone into captivity, and they come back, and they're going to meet Melchizedek at the Valley of the Kings. So that's right outside Jerusalem. And this figure shows up, and nobody knows who he is, where he came from. His name means the King of Righteousness. And it's weird because Melchi is not the normal way you spell king of. In fact, when it talks about the king of Sodom, it just says Melech Sodom, king of Sodom. But when it says Melchizedek, it's king of righteousness, but when you look at it in Hebrew, and Kennedy, you can probably affirm this, it looks like it says, my king is righteousness, or king, my king of righteousness. And so why are you spelling the word king of two different ways? And he's king of Salem, and we're told in the Psalms that Salem is the other name for Jerusalem. Like that means peace, the king of Shalom. And so he's the king of righteousness and the king of peace. And he meets Abraham and he blesses Abraham. It's like, who is that? Where does he come from? He's a priest and a king. Like, what in the world is going on? The kings who attack are from here, Shinar, which is Babylon, the Elamites, Lasar, and the Goyim. And you can see all these are places familiar for Abraham. It looks like the story's telling us that he followed the Euphrates River. This is intractable desert. You can't go this way. And so he went here, and then they take a right turn and end up in Haran, and God remains faithful, and he comes down here, and it's the land that I will show you. I give all this land, but he wanders around and he doesn't ever seem to get it. So like, what's going on there? We can see different maps, and it's interesting that the Dead Sea, this is the place where Moses stood. He couldn't go into Promised Land. All this is desert. You step in the puffs of smoke, dusty, waterless desert. But you're looking across some of the most fertile land there is. And this, I don't know if you can tell, but it's on top of a mountain. This is way below sea level. In fact, if you stand right here, you're standing on the lowest point on planet Earth where you can look up and see the sky. When you're standing at the shore of the Dead Sea, that's they've got those boreholes and the caves and everything. Those are all lower. But the lowest place where you can stand on the surface of the earth and look to the sky is the shore of the Dead Sea. Like, what in the world's going on with this? The Dead Sea is so weird. When you feel the water, it doesn't even feel like water, it feels like motor oil. It's so toxic that if you drank that much of it, it would kill you. It's so dangerous that more people drowned in the Dead Sea than drowned in the Mediterranean Ocean in all of Israel's coastline. And the reason is because you don't sink in the water the same way you sink in the water of the ocean. And so it's really hard to swim when you float like that. It's so buoyant, you can put a newspaper on the surface of the water and it won't sink. That's weird. This stuff is happening around. It's like, what is this place? That's where all of this stuff happens today. I thought this was pretty insightful, and then we'll dive in and read our text. I don't know that I would have thought about this unless Sailhammer had pointed it out, but I thought it was pretty good. Lying behind Abram's response to both kings is the contrast between the offer of the king of Salem and the offer of the king of Sodom. The king of Salem brings bread and wine as a priestly act. Now, I hadn't noticed this till he said it, but that whole thing, bread and wine, that appears over and over in the description of the tabernacle. The thing that's on the table of showbread is bread and wine. So that phrase appears. And so Melchizedek, who's a king, is doing a priestly thing in bringing bread and wine to Abraham, and acknowledges that the Most High God, creator of heaven and earth, who delivered the adversaries into Abraham's hand. It wasn't so much the skill of Abraham, but rather the blessing of God that led him to rescue Lot. In other words, the perspective of the king of Salem is precisely that of the author himself, Moses, who also has acknowledged at the start of his work that the God who delivered Israel from the hand of the Egyptians, see 22, is the creator of heaven and earth, Genesis 1:1. Abraham's response to the king of Salem, then, is the appropriate recognition of the validity of Melchizedek's offer as well as of his priesthood. Abraham paid a tithe, and later Israelites are going to pay a tithe to the Levites. And then Sailhammer writes this: the offer of the king of Sodom was quite different. He would give to Abraham all the possessions recovered in the battle. Abraham's response not only speaks for himself, but also allows how the author views this gesture. It was an offer of reward from the king of Sodom, and Abraham would have nothing to do with it. As his solemn speech at the close of the narrative showed, Abraham's reward would not come from the kings of this world, but from the Lord, who is the creator of heaven and earth. Any possessions, quote unquote, he was to have would come from the Lord, as the following chapter sets out to show. And I don't know that I ever thought about this chapter as Abraham's response to two kings, but I think once Sailhammer pointed out, it's hard not to see that there's something like that going on. So let's work through the text and just see what we can find. I wish I had a sheet with the meaning of all the names. I've tried to do it many times. These names are very debated. I'll tell you the ones I know when we come across. It came about in the days of Amraphel, the king of Shinar. Whatever this is, it's bad. I can't tell you how it's bad, but it's where the Tower of Babel was. It's where Babylon's going to be. The king of Shinar, Arioch, his name means the lion. The king of Elasar, and Kadar Laomer, which is weird because they're going to spell this guy's name differently, a little lower. And I'm wondering, why do you spell it one way here and one way down below? And I don't know the answer. But Kedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and Tidal, the king of Goyim. Goyim is people, so the king of the nations. They made battle with Raya, the king of Sodom, and with Beresha, the king of Gomorrah. Now, any of those of you who've taken Hebrew you might be able to guess what this guy's name is. Be'erah and Be'ereshah. But you might not be able to guess it because I really didn't test you on vocabulary as much as I should, but you might be able to guess it.
Is that one of them create and one of them beginning?
So one of them is in evil, Ra. So the king of Sodom, his name is in evil. And then the king of Gomorrah is in wickedness. So these are really bad names. Don't you have the question like, why are you named in evil and why are you named in wickedness? Shinab, that looks like he changed the father. The king of Adamah, I bet any of you guys can guess that. He was the king of, like, that's almost Adam, isn't it? Shem Aber, breaker of the name, I think, was the king of Zeboim. Notice we've got a Kathiv Kare thing going up. There are two different spellings. And Bela, that is Zoar, the king of Bela, that is Zoar. And his name isn't given. Like, why do you give the other names, but you don't give his name? These were bounded together in the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea. 12 years they served Kedar Laomer. The 13th year they rebelled. This word rebelled, marad, is where we get the word Nimrod from. So Nimrod looks like the one having rebelled or something, but it's from this word. In the 14th year, Kedar Laomer and the kings who were with him came up and they struck the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Karnaim. I think this is related to that whole Asherah, you know, the fertility cult goddess. And this word means horns, so the Asherah of the horns. And they struck the Zuzim with them, and the Emim in Shaveh Kiryathaim, and the hot people in the high mountain. I mean, that's what it looks like. It says to me, She'ar to El Paran, which is upon the desert. They turned back and came to Ein Mishpat, that means the fountain of judgment, which is Kadesh, that is the holy place. I'm assuming they're equating that with Kadesh Barnea, which is the last town of the wandering, the first town of the entry into Israel. It's right on the border of the desert there. And they struck all the field of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites were there. Any of you who've had Hebrew, like, can you guess what Amorite probably means? Maybe the talkers, the talkers. And they were living in Hatzon Tamar. Tamar has something to do with sweet stuff. The king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah and the king of Admah and the king of the Zeboim and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, they arranged with them for battle in the valley of Siddim with Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of the Goyim, and Amraphel, the king of Shinar, and Arioch, that's the lion guy, king of Elasar. 4 kings with 5. Now, the valley of Siddim pits, pits. And in Hebrew, that's the way you say was full of pits. There are pits everywhere. And the king of Sodom and Gomorrah, so that's weird because it's been listing two people, but now it just says king of Sodom and Gomorrah. We do have a text variant there. It probably says and the king of Gomorrah, which is exactly what it says, but B19A says king of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then it says they fell there. And there's a debate what this means. And I don't know what to tell you and which one's right, but I'll show you what the debate is. Now, the valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits, meaning slime pits. So we're talking about hot tar that bubbles up out of the ground. And then it says, as the king of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into those pits. Now, the Hebrew may mean that. That's not the way I read it for years. The way I've read it for years is they fled. So who is the they? They fled. Who is the they? The king of Sodom and Gomorrah. And they, plural, fell there. Who would that be if you read it the way I'm reading it? It would mean that the king of Sodom fell into a tar pit. Do you think he died? Have you ever been out to like Yosemite and seen those like hot pits of bubbly? Imagine that of tar. Imagine if you fell into that. Would you die?
You might melt.
Yeah. If you didn't die and you fell in a tar pit, what would you look like?
Burns all over.
I don't recommend this movie, but if you've ever watched the HBO series John Adams, there's a scene in there where somebody's tarred and feathered. It's brutal. Like I said, in some ways I'm sorry I watched it, but I can't get the image out of my mind where they throw someone in hot tar and then put feathers, ride them out of town on a rail covered with tar and feathers. You can read it my way, but you don't have to read it my way if you think the they means people fell. Look how the different translations do it. The kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and they fell into them. So who, New American Standard, who is the they who they fell? It's the king, right? NIV, then the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. Some of the men fell. Which way are they doing it? They're doing it. It's not. Some fell, NLT. ASV, the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and they fell there. You can see major translations are differing. And I don't know what to tell you other than it's weird. There's something weird about it. Is there anything weird about that word yiphalu, that when I say it out loud in Hebrew, from nafal, Like anything come to mind when it says, and they naphalled there? Right, it's the same word as the Nephilim. And it's the same word when God confronts Cain and says, why does your face naphalud, yiphalud? Like, one of those things is the exact same spelling. So, like, is the king of Sodom a Nephilim? And, like, I don't know the answer, but, like, I think that may be an important question. The rest fled to the mountain, and they took all the possession of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food, and they went away, and they took Lot and all his possession. And Lot was the brother of Abraham, and they went, or they came, I think it's the attackers came, and he, that is Lot, was in Sodom. And a delivered person, so an escapee came and told to Abram, the Hebrew, and I think this is the first time it calls Abraham a Hebrew in the Bible. And the word Hebrew means the crosser over, the one who's crossing over. And he was living in the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner. And they were the lords of the covenant of Abraham. I think that's saying they were Abraham's landlords. Here's a question. I think we're going to have an aha moment. Have you picked up in the story that Abraham will come to a tree and build an altar? He does that over and over and over again. Comes to a tree and builds an altar. I'm going to ask an intelligent reader question. What's the intelligent reader question I'm going to ask? Why does he come to a tree and build an altar? Why does he do that? Porter, do you have an idea?
Because, well, that's Jesus too. Or that's what I'm thinking at least.
In terms of the meta-narrative, there's an altar by a tree, right? It's like foreshadowing the ultimate.
I don't know, but that might not be what you're getting at.
Well, we're all looking at the same painting, and I don't think anybody's going to exhaust fully what would a tree and an altar evoke? And God appearing, what would it evoke?
Eden.
It's mimicking the Garden of Eden. Like whenever he comes somewhere, he kind of mimics the Garden of Eden, but is it ever the Garden of Eden? Like it's like the garden, it's similar, but is it Eden? It's not maybe Eden. That idea didn't come from me, it came from Trimper Longman. I think it's a great idea. Once somebody asks a question, you can't unsee it. So I think that's what's going on, like he's coming to places and he's like building little tabernacles, and those tabernacles have Eden-like imagery in it. Abram heard that his brother was taken. Oh, I'd love to see this. Mild, gentle Abraham, and then his blood is up. And it says this, I love it. He emptied out his house. So he didn't take some, he took everybody. All the trained men. You mean Abraham trained a little mini army? Abraham trained a mini army? Why did he train a mini army? He trained a mini army and he was ready. That seems really weird to me. He emptied out his house, the dedicated ones, the men who were born in his house, and then it gives us the number 8 and 10 and 300. Now, the rabbis do something really weird with this. I think they're wrong, but they do something really weird. Do you know how we talked about Hebrews use their alphabet as their number system? What's that called when you do that? Starts with a G. Cultures that use their alphabet as their number system. Gematria. So if you're in a culture that uses gematria, what's true of every word, every name, every place, every event? If you has a numerical meaning. And so you're going to ask, can you go from the number to a word? I don't think you actually can, because there are going to be many words, because it isn't like digits, it's just values added up together. They don't have a digit system, they just have numbers. You can't go from a number to a word, but you can look at a word and say what the number is. And you're going to ask me a great intelligent reader question about the numeric value 318. What's your intelligent reader question? And you know you don't have to take my word for it. If you have the free version of Logos, they actually have a number converter. I'm just saying, we may or may not use this, but if we come to a word, we can paste that word in there and it'll give us the numeric value. But what's your intelligent reader question? Is there any word you know of that has the number 318 in gematria? And there is. Abraham's servant Eleazar's name has a gematria of 318. And so the rabbis say it wasn't even 318, it was just the two of them. I don't think that's right, but it is odd that Eleazar's name has a gematria of 318. When we run across Eleazar, remind me and I'll paste it in and we can see how they do it for us. So 318, and they pursued them, hotly pursued them all the way to Dan, so that they chased them out of the land of Israel, or they're pursuing all the way out of the land of Israel. And then he divided at night against it. This is almost verbatim of Saul with King Nahash. He and his servants, and he struck them, just like Gideon fell on the Midianites and turned the nighttime revelry into a rout. That's exactly what Abram did. And he kept it up. He pursued them all the way to Hobah, which is on the left-hand side of Damascus. And he, this is Abraham, returned all the possessions, and also Lot. What does Lot's name mean? Cover up. His brother and his possessions, and he returned also the women, which I think means their wives, and also the people. And the king of Sodom came to meet him after he returned from striking down Kedar Laomer. And I don't know if those of you who can read Hebrew, notice they're spelling that word differently than they spelled it before. They're splitting it into two words. I think it's a play on words. I don't know what the play on words is, but it's like Kedar, and then it's Kader Laomer, quote unquote. And so it's some kind of funny joke or play on word, but I don't know what it is, but there has to be a reason why they're spelling it slightly differently here. I just don't know what it is. Now, let's suppose that my reading and the others that follow me are right, that the king of Sodom fell into a tar pit. Give me all the possibilities of what this could be when it says the king of Sodom came to Abraham.
His successor, or
It could be his successor. So, like the dad died, and then this whoever the son was came. It could be that. If it was the king who fell in the tar pit, what would the guy look like?
not so good.
He'd be covered with tar, wouldn't he? Like he'd be a pitch black, tar covered, scarred. Like, would that be creepy to see someone like covered in tar? So I don't know if that's the right way to look at it. I tried to do a short history of interpretation, but I ran out of time. But I don't know what's going on here. If it's the guy or if people are all over the place. Some people do it, some fell, and so it's not. And you can do that in Hebrew. It's totally legitimate. I just would never have thought of doing it that way unless there were a reason. Melchizedek, and that looks like, does it not, my king is righteousness, or if it's an archaic construct, king of righteousness, and then king of peace, Melech, Salem, brought out to them bread and wine, two things that are on the table of showbread in the temple. He was a king to God Most High, El Elyon. Have you ever heard that Amy Grant song, El Shaddai, El Shaddai? In that song, she says El Elyon, like she quotes this, God Most High. And he, PL blessed him. So this is Melchizedek, PL blessed Abraham. And he said, blessed be Abraham to El Elyon, to God Most High. And this guy right here is a tricky little word. Oh my goodness. So much ink has been spilled over this word. So this word can mean possessor of heaven and earth. It can also mean creator of heaven and earth. It can also mean whatever it is that Eve does to produce Cain, because it's that same word. She says, I have with the Lord's help, I have kanad a son. So you're the translator. How are you going to translate? Because here's why it's important. In Proverbs 8:22, it says of Lady Wisdom, God has kanad me as the beginning of his works. Now, if you're an Arian and you don't believe Jesus is divine, how are you going to translate that? Created, right? And so that's, hey, it means created here, it means created there. If you're not an Arian, how are you going to say, well, no, it means possess? And then somebody's going to come along and say, well, how does it relate to Eve having Cain because she kanaz? It's like, I'm not sure we have a good word to translate what this is. Because if it's create, did God not have wisdom before he created wisdom? And if he possessed it, he possessed me as the beginning of his work. Or if it's begot, he begot me is the beginning. And then you think, well, the whole eternal, it's like, oh my goodness, like this is a whole dissertation level discussion of this word.
Has anyone ever translated its source?
I was the source of heaven and earth. I see what you're getting at, because that's picking up more of the Eve thing, isn't it? It is interesting how all of these texts, they're all connected, because 8:22, Lady Wisdom is talking about delighting in the sons of Adam before God ever created the world. It's like, what is that? Like, they're all connected. All these passages are connected. So typically what I do, get something like this, I just say whatever the word is. Blessed be Abram to God Most High, the Kona of heaven and earth. Maybe the more I read, the more it will inform what that is. Blessed be God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand and gave to you, he gave, so I think you're switching subjects there. Abraham gave to him a tenth from everything. The king of Sodom said to Abram, give to me, and how is this translated in, give to me the people? Those of you who can read Hebrew, how would you do that? Give to me. You could do it, singular, plural. And what would be the super literal way to do it? Give to me the. You could do it life. I would have thought that would have been high. How? Soul. Isn't that what it technically? Give to me the soul, meaning give to me the souls of the people. You take the stuff, give to me the souls. Help me with that. And what does Abraham say? No. No. Give to me the soul. Take for yourself the possession. And Abram said to the king of Sodom. And remember, this king of Sodom is the same king of Sodom that Abraham pleads for mercy in 18. Abram said to the king of Sodom, I've lifted my hand to YHWH, God Most High, the Kona of heaven and earth, however you're going to translate that. And just, I hope this is going to work. I bet it's not going to work. Oh, it did. Yeah. You can see I have gotten a man with our verse here, our verse here. Do you thus repay the Lord, you foolish people? Is he not the Father who kanad you? Now that could go make, but that could go beget too there, could it not? You kanad my inward parts. And then 8:22, see, I was telling you the truth. The Lord kanad me as the reshit of his way. Oh my goodness, is that reading Genesis 1:1 as a bait essentii? God as wisdom created the heavens and the earth. I don't know, but notice they do possess, the Septuagint does create there. And that's why this became a crux interpretum in the Arian debate. God Most High, the Kona of heaven and earth, if a thread to the thong of a sandal, and if I take from anything which belongs to you, and you will not say, I made Abraham rich. only what the young men have eaten, and the share of the men who went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, they will take their portion. May God bless the reading of his word this afternoon. What do you find interesting about all that?
It is very Edenic in its theology. As I was reading it, I was thinking, it's really interesting. I didn't know the translation of lives to soul, but the idea that it's almost as if you have two covenants offered to Abraham.
Get rich. I'll make you rich. Just side with me, the wicked tar-covered king. If that's the right way to, just give me the souls, and I'll make you rich.
And it's interesting. Abraham's response, part of it is to quote the blessing Melchizedek gave him. God Most High, the possessor, creator of heaven and earth. That he belongs to God, and he basically says, no, God's going to give me everything.
Yeah, God's going to make me rich.
And that, I guess it means a lot more when you look at the beginning of Genesis 15, where God comes and reassures Abraham.
He's going to protect him. That's exactly right. And that's exactly the right way to read this. Like, we're kind of in an artificial break just with this chapter. Did you have any questions about this chapter? Or questions about any of the figures in this chapter?
Who's Melchizedek and what does he have to do with Jesus?
Who's Melchizedek? What does he have to do with Jesus? So, I want to show you something. I don't know that this is right, but this is what Jews believe. And you tell me what you find interesting. So what resource is this? If we want to know what ancient Jewish people believe, what resource do we go to? Mikra Gedaloth, and where is it? Like, where can anyone access it? The reference wall, the far reference wall on the very bottom, kind of in the middle. It's yellow and white, I think, maybe. Mikra Gedaloth, the great commentary. I've got the Logos version here. This is what Jewish heavyweights say about it. And you tell me what you find interesting, and you tell me if you can get to where they got. So we're just reading Mikra Gedaloth, the Valley of Shaveh, or as Onkelos, and Onkelos is the Aramaic Targum, has it the flat plain. I did not know that, but evidently that's what Shaveh means. It was clear of trees, the valley of the king. According to Onkelos, this piece of ground was 1 furlong in length, 30 rods, that the king could use for play. So this was a place, flat place that they raced horses at, is where this happened. The Midrash takes a combination of names to indicate that this valley was a valley where all the nations came together as equals, so that's another possible meaning of Shaveh, and crowned Abraham as their leader, the elect of God. Rashbam, the king of Sodom, came to meet him, having emerged from the cave where he and the king of Gomorrah had been hiding. And if we go back and read it in Hebrew, it says they fled to the mountains, and one of those words, you could read it as to a cave. So they're reading it, meaning they fled into a cave. Kimchi says the level valley, meaning that it had no rises or hollows. It was used for racing horses. The Valley of the Kings, it was the king and his nobles, of course, who raced their horses. 30 rods mentioned by Onkelos was precisely the distance horses were raced. The king of Sodom, additional comment, Gershonides. The king of Sodom came out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh, but he said nothing to him until Abram and his troops had had a chance to eat and drink. Melchizedek. According to the Midrash, this was Shem. Help me. How did they get there? How did they get that Melchizedek is Shem?
Was it Shem blessed by Noah?
Shem was blessed by Noah. Is Shem alive according to the genealogical numbers? Remember how we did the numbers and we did that? Is Shem alive? Shem's alive, so it could be Shem. There's nothing in the text to me that says it's Shem, but it could be in terms of who is alive. When there are 8 people who are alive who come off the ark and Noah dies, who's going to be the king? Shem. He's the blessed one, right? And when there are 8 people who are alive and Noah does the sacrifice, but Noah dies, who's going to become the one who does the sacrifice? Shem. The text doesn't say it was Shem, but you can see how they got there. Shem is alive. He was the leader of all humanity, and he was the priestly leader. And, well, let's keep reading. As is commonly done for those returning from battle, Shem was showing Abram that he had no enmity toward him for killing his descendants. And what that is Elam is one of the descendants of Shem. The Midrash takes bread and wine here as an allusion to the offering, and that Abraham's own descendants would one day make here. They're pointing out that if this is the Valley of the King in Jerusalem, this is the same place where in the future bread and wine would be offered to God. Rashbam, King Melchizedek of Salem, this story interrupts the story of the king of Sodom to teach us that Abraham was speaking strict truth when he told the king of Sodom, only that which the young men have eaten. Abraham himself ate from what Melchizedek gave him. Ibn Ezra, so named because he was king, Melech, over a place of righteousness, Sedek. But some say it's just a name, Salem. And then, who is this? Ibn Ezra says Jerusalem. Proof of this is Psalm 76:3. What does Psalm 76:3 say? Salem became his abode. That is Zion, his den. Clearly Zion and Jerusalem are the same place. So the rabbis are saying that Psalm 76 equates Salem and Jerusalem. He was priest of God Most High. That is, as the Aramaic translation put it, he served before God Most High, which is what priests do. That's what the verb from its root means, that they may serve me as priest. And we see from the pun on Melchizedek, you are a priest forever, a rightful king by my decree. He acted properly by first offering blessing to Abram, who had voluntarily rescued captives, and only then blessing God. So Melchizedek's only mentioned 2 places in the Old Testament, here and Psalm 110:4. Do you know that Psalm 110 is the most quoted psalm in the New Testament? It's quoted 30 times. The majority of them come from the mouth of Jesus. And Jesus makes the argument, hey, if this is about David, why is David calling his son Solomon Lord? The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand. So Jesus thought it was David talking about Solomon, but Jesus said, if that's true, why would David call Solomon Lord? And you think, well, he wouldn't call Solomon Lord. And so Jesus is going to say, well, maybe it's not about David. Maybe it's about somebody else. Maybe it's about somebody who's going to be a priest forever. Maybe it's going to be about someone who's going to be the King of righteousness and the King of peace and the King of Jerusalem. And maybe it's about someone who blessed Abraham. And you think, oh my goodness, he's doing the whole Bible, biblical theology. The writer of Hebrews points out that Melchizedek has no father or mother and no genealogy. And he says that's connecting the story with Jesus. So I don't know if the writer of Hebrews is saying that Jesus was Melchizedek. The writer of Hebrews is at least saying that Melchizedek foreshadows Jesus. He may be saying more than that, I don't know. Kimchi says, King Melchizedek of Salem, all the kings of Jerusalem took a Zedek suffix to their name, meaning righteousness. See King, my Lord is righteousness, who's mentioned in Joshua 10:1. Jerusalem is a place of righteousness. I'm hearing these comments and I think, well, Jeremiah says the Messiah's name will be YHWH, my righteousness. So why don't we do that one? Other gods are alien to it, for it lies along the equator, has a temperate climate. I don't think that's true. I think it's above the equator. I think the equator is down in Egypt. Jerusalem is the same latitude as Georgia is in terms of where it is on the globe. Nachmanides, king of Salem. Salem is Jerusalem, is clear from Salem, became his abode. In the time of Joshua, there was still a king Adonai-Zedek. All the nations had long known this spot as a special place, as the center of the inhabited world, or they knew by tradition that it was the spot corresponding to the sanctuary on high, where the Shekinah of the Holy One, which is named as Zedek, righteousness, dwells. See, all of this makes me think the rabbi's suggestion may not be a bad suggestion if Jerusalem somehow connected to the Garden of Eden, the original site of the garden. Where, if you were Shem, where would you go if you had made it through the flood? The Genesis Rabbah, which is kind of like the Living Bible translation notes, the Genesis Rabbah says the place makes its inhabitants righteous. So Melchizedek and Adonai-Zedek simply mean the King Lord of Zedek, that is Jerusalem. He was a priest of God. This lets us know that Abraham would not give a tithe to the priest of other gods. I don't know, can you see how helpful Mikroth Gedaloth is? Like, it gives you Jewish stuff, and there's no guarantee that what they give you is right. But sometimes they think through issues, and they certainly look at the text more carefully than we do. And so if there's a similar passage, oftentimes they'll see it. All right, well, that's what I have for you today. I hope you have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you on Tuesday. Thank you.